This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Robin Dwyer. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. Volodymyr Zelensky calls for a meeting with China's President Xi Jinping to discuss Beijing's proposal on ending the conflict in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Russia welcomes China's 12-point plan and says it is open to talks. Millions of people cast their vote in Nigeria as long queues form outside polling stations for the tightly contested presidential election. And Beijing celebrates 30 years of China's manned space program. Both Kyiv and Moscow have welcomed China's proposals on ending the conflict in Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelensky says he wants to meet with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping to discuss the plan. Beijing unveiled a 12-point paper on the first anniversary of Russia's attack, calling for peace talks and respect for national sovereignty. China has not yet publicly responded to Zelensky's call for a summit.
It is correct to think that if there are already thoughts that somehow correspond to respect for international law, territorial integrity and some security issues, then I believe that we should use this in the normal sense of the word and work with China on this matter. Why not? Our task is to bring everyone together, to isolate some. That is our task.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent Will Denslow in Kyiv. So will Ukraine responding positively to China's proposal?
Yeah, Robin, the message from Ukraine's president is that he liked some parts of China's proposal. He didn't like other parts of it, but ultimately he welcomed the fact that Beijing is showing a willingness to contribute. There has been, though, less of a positive reaction from one of his senior advisers, Mikhailo Podolak, who took to social media saying that any nation claiming to be a global player shouldn't offer up unrealistic plans. He added that a nation shouldn't be betting on the aggressor that will lose the war. This comes in a week where Podolak also stated that this proposal put forward was more of a freeze to the war rather than a peace plan. He also said that Ukraine would not accept any kind of peace initiative if it didn't include the return to Ukraine's territories that it saw in 1991 after the collapse of the Soviet Union. We have, though, heard from President Zelensky. He says that he welcomes initiatives and proposals from any nation, be it China or nations, he said, in Africa or across Latin America, as examples as well. To that note, we've heard from Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who has had conversations with both the presidents of Russia as well as Ukraine. Now, in that call with Vladimir Putin, he said that Turkey was looking for a just peace and that the country was ready to contribute. President Zelensky, in his readout after his conversation with Turkey's president, said that he thanked Turkey for its ongoing support, especially when it comes to its contributions in getting the Black Sea Grain Initiative passed. Robin?
And Will, the EU has approved a 10th package of sanctions against Russia.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Robin, to the tune of around 11 billion euros. We believe it also includes some stricter penalties on those that it accuses of spreading Russian propaganda. It also, for the first time, includes sanctions against members of Iran's Revolutionary Guard. Of course, this comes as Iran has been accused of transporting its drones to Russia that have been used to attack Ukrainian cities. Of course, this has been a charge denied by both Tehran and Moscow. We've also heard from President Zelensky's advisor Podolak on this topic. He said that it's a start, it's encouraging, but he said that economic sanctions should cause real pain. He said in the future he wants the EU to take further steps, including sanctioning Russia's nuclear industry. Robin?
Will, thank you very much. Our correspondent Will Denslow in Kyiv. Russia says it appreciates China's plan to resolve the conflict in Ukraine and that it's open to achieving its aims through political and diplomatic means. Moscow has also warned that Western sanctions will have no impact after fresh announcements from the United States and the European Union. Meanwhile, former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev has rejected claims that Moscow's troops in Ukraine are running out of missiles and says that the country's factories are working around the clock to meet the increased demand. NATO members have vowed to send more ammunition to support Ukraine as the conflict enters its second year. But there are fears that the additional supply of military aid, including Abrams tanks from the United States, could escalate Russia's offensive. Our correspondent Owen Fairclough reports.
Ukrainian troops in Poland getting to grips with German-made Leopard tanks, hoping this kind of firepower can give them the edge in their conflict with Russia. These tanks will be a great help to our army, and after we master them, after we use them in combat conditions, I think they will have a very great effect. Leading NATO allies, including Germany, the UK, and even membership candidates Finland and Sweden, are sending hundreds of tanks, armoured vehicles and artillery to support Ukraine. But analysts say it was the US decision to commit its M1 Abrams tanks that unlocked this international flow of weapons.
US President Joe Biden resisted pressure within his own administration to send tanks to Ukraine, then denied he'd succumb to European entreaties to do just that, so they could present a united front led by NATO. But whatever back-channel discussions took place, this huge influx of arms to Ukraine is a significant moment in a conflict characterized on social media by the hashtag World War III.
And marking the first anniversary of Russia launching what it called a special operation to protect unspecified threats to its sovereignty, Biden pledged even more military aid during a surprise visit to Kyiv.
Together, we've committed nearly 700 tanks and thousands of armored vehicles, 1,000 artillery systems, all to defend Ukraine.
Some experts question whether these weapons can make a difference beyond their symbolic value. And the prospect of this conflict escalating to another level was underscored by Russian President Vladimir Putin. The Ministry of Defense and Russia's nuclear agency must ensure readiness to test Russian nuclear weapons. If the US conducts tests, we will do so too. Putin suspending Russia's participation in the last remaining treaty with the US to limit their nuclear weapons. Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Washington.
As Ukrainians began fleeing across the border into Hungary a year ago, volunteers stepped up to help them. Some gave them food and clothing at train stations and border crossings. Others helped with the language barrier or opened their homes to give them somewhere to stay while they thought about what to do next. Our correspondent Pablo Gutierrez reports.
Soon after Gio Dara fled Ukraine, he was given a guitar by a volunteer, a happy note at a difficult time. After days of traveling with his family, he reached Hungary and arrived at the home of Jeroen Van Drunen, who was sheltering Ukrainian refugees.
When I sang it, I felt that maybe music can help in some ways, you know, because before it, I lost all the faith.
Van Drunen in the early 1990s worked as a Dutch diplomat in Ukraine, so when the conflict started, his immediate reaction was to help.
Some of these people had been spending 10 days in a car without decent food, without heating and everything, so we simply tried to get them back to life, so to say.
Am I the only sinner in this cruel world?
With the help of Van Drunen, Dara and his family relocated to London. He continues to play his music, organizing charity concerts to raise funds for those that remain in Ukraine.
Hungarian authorities say nearly 34,000 Ukrainians have settled in this country since the conflict began. The lines of people seeking food and shelter are long gone, but the need remains.
Andras Seward runs the Migration Aid Refugee Center in Budapest, which has housed thousands of Ukrainian refugees over the past year. He says the challenges for Ukrainians and centers like his that rely on public donations are becoming more severe as the conflict drags on.
Many refugees used up all their savings during the first months here in Hungary. The needs change as the conflict continues. They first needed food and clothing. Now they need permanent housing, education and work.
The Hungarian government gives Ukrainians that have settled in the country a monthly subsidy of about $50 per adult and $25 per child. But Seward says that's not enough.
They can't live off what the government gives them, so they come to us for help.
Some Ukrainian refugees who were initially helped at this center now work for it, helping other refugees like them.
I fled to Hungary with my step-parents, and we stayed here for a while. Then I volunteered to work with the children at the shelter, and now I'm a staff worker.
Kenneth says she plans to study at a university in Hungary, but hopes to return to Ukraine one day.
I never thought of living here in Hungary. My heart is back home in Ukraine. That is where I see my future.
For Kenneth and others like her, hope has not faded away, even if the fighting continues. In Budapest, Pablo Gutierrez, CGTN.
And you can see more of our reporting from Ukraine, including stories from those who left the country and those who stayed at europe.cgtn.com and on CGTN Europe's Facebook and YouTube pages. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Nigerians go to the polls in a tight contest for the presidency of Africa's biggest economy.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Welcome back. A reminder of our headlines. Volodymyr Zelensky calls for a meeting with China's President Xi Jinping to discuss Beijing's proposal on ending the conflict in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Russia welcomes China's 12-point plan and says it is open to talks. People in Nigeria have queued for hours to cast their ballot in the tightly contested presidential election as Africa's most populous nation and biggest economy chooses its new leader. Polls were meant to close several hours ago, but some voting stations remain open due to delays. There are three top contenders in the race to succeed President Muhammadu Buhari, who is stepping down after serving the maximum 8 years. The election comes amid worsening violence and economic hardship for the continent's top oil producer. Michael Famarotti is co-founder and head of intelligence at data company Steers, which has been collecting information in the lead-up to Nigeria's vote. I asked him what it suggests about the results.
So what I would say is that the poll, and so our polls and a lot of corroborating polls are saying one thing that is quite clear, and that is that the Labour Party candidate, who was considered an outsider and still is actually, is the most popular candidate in Nigeria for the presidential elections. Now, the emphasis on popular is that in Nigeria, like in many parts of the continent, that popularity does not always translate to victory. And essentially, that's what we're going to be keeping an eye out on. to see if that popularity does play out in terms of the final vote count.
So what are the main issues that voters have been concerned about?
So again, the polls and also anecdotal data are quite emphatic. Nigerians care the most about insecurity. That is unsurprising. I think even the international media has carried a lot of stories and reports from the last 18 months, just showing the levels of insecurity that has plagued the country. Sometime last year, I believe in August, September, quite famously, there was a mass prison break in Abuja, the capital, and a number of Boko Haram terrorists were released from the prison. So generally, there's been an air of insecurity, and that has only risen in the run-up to the polls. Just over the last week, we have seen 2 candidates killed already, 2 senatorial candidates killed, and that just emphasizes the level of insecurity that everybody in the country is facing at the moment.
And we've seen more young voters registering this time round, haven't we? What difference could they make?
Potentially huge. So in terms of Nigeria's voting population, last cycle there were about 83 million voters. This time we've added another 10 million, and most of them are young voters. So they could potentially sway the race. For those who are aware, in 2020, there was a massive police brutality protest movement galvanized by the youth. And since then, there's been a sort of political awakening. And the sentiment generally is that if the youth do come out en masse to vote, they are likely to vote for the Labour Party candidate and could even swing the elections his way.
And what about regional variations? Do different candidates have more support in certain areas?
Yes. So again, for those not aware, Nigeria is broadly split into a Muslim North and a Christian South. And what is striking is that from 1999 to date, Nigerians generally vote along religious lines. So in the STARS poll, only 3% of Muslims are voting for the Christian Labour Party candidate, and only 17% of Christians are voting for any Muslim candidates, right? So you have this situation where the votes are really stratified by the North and South. There are some nuances in those regions, but generally, Christian South votes one way and the Muslim North tends to vote the other way.
So you talked about the issue of insecurity. What about the economy? How important will that be for the new president?
Very. So incredibly in Nigeria, in the run-up to the polls, over the last 3 weeks, there has been a cash shortage because the Central Bank of Nigeria governor decided to redesign the currency about 3 to 6 months ago. One of the reasons that has been put forward by political agents is it was to curb vote buying. Now, as laudable as that goal may be, it has led to a severe cash crunch that could just impede people's ability to actually go out and vote. So that's one practical issue. But what I would say as an economist is that whoever wins this weekend's polls, they are going to inherit Nigeria's worst economy since democracy, and turning the ship around is going to take a lot of hard work, and there is still quite a lot of pain to come for the average Nigerian.
And what about a turnout at this election? A big country, Africa's most populous country, how will that impact the results?
Huge. So Nigeria's voting turnout was quite shambolic in 2019. Only 35% of eligible voters turned out to vote. The expectation is that 2023 should be much higher. We're expecting somewhere between 50 to 60%. Again, Nigerians are generally quite jaded and tired and want change. The sentiment and also the analysis from our polls show that a high turnout scenario would favor the third party candidates, the Labour Party candidates, as a lot of these newer voters are likely to opt for him. But if we do see a low turnout scenario, perhaps because people can't go to vote or a lot of their votes don't get counted properly, then that is likely to favor a more established party, most especially the APC candidate who is running on a ticket of continuity from the present administration.
More than 80,000 Ukrainian refugees have arrived in the UK since the start of the conflict. They were offered temporary shelter with private host families under a government scheme. But as Russia's assault drags on, many still face uncertainty over their future. Our correspondent Kitty Logan reports.
Ukraine seems a world away from this London suburb, but it's not forgotten. The music, titled A Cry for Ukraine, a timely reminder of a life left behind and a family still apart a year after the military conflict in Ukraine began.
My family was separated. My youngest daughter with me here, but my oldest daughter stay in Ukraine with her father.
Ksenia is a former professional dancer, rehearsing for a show of defiance against a war which forced her to flee her country.
First it was difficult, but I really appreciate it to my host family. They really helped me and my daughter to accommodate here, and now I have a job.
The Ukrainian community here has come together to help refugees share experience, hosting an event which they call an evening of invincibility.
Definitely really tough year, a lot of people, but I think evening will really not too committed. It's been incredible support in here.
This far in hard work, and some things still aren't easy for Ukrainian refugees. It's a struggle to find government support, and many mothers need help with childcare. But finding a proper home is proving the biggest challenge.
The main issues have really been to do with housing. I think a lot of people's 6-month period is coming to an end with their sponsors, and so that means that they are no longer able to use their accommodation and they're having to find alternative ways of housing.
The government only helped Ukraine with a 6-month stay. Many refugees are now on their own.
There are still many challenges for Ukrainian refugees 1 year on, but the community here is determined to lay on a show of solidarity. And people in the area say they will continue with their support.
Community groups are making a huge difference, offering practical advice and company.
I feel like here it's really supportive, especially when we have clubs. We have a lot of clubs around London, and I just feel like at home when I come here and just talk to Ukrainian people.
But for Ukrainian refugees, the next step could be the hardest, moving from being temporary guests to creating a whole new life in the UK, while a return to their home country remains in doubt. Kitty Logan, CGTN, London.
The French President Emmanuel Macron says he's planning to visit China in April, which will be his first trip to the country in 4 years. Macron made the comments at the opening day of the Paris International Agricultural Show. From there, our correspondent Ross Cullen reports.
The show began 1 day after the anniversary of the start of the conflict in Ukraine, which ultimately led last year to rocketing cereal prices and disruption to Ukraine's wheat exports to developing countries. The message from President Macron was that the French government is ready to help farmers on grain prices if there continues to be market pressure. Well, Ukraine is currently looking at a peace plan presented by China. President Macron confirmed at the show that he is going to make his first trip to China since 2019 in a visit scheduled for early April. There was a mixed reception for the president's appearance here at the Paris Agricultural Show. It's customary for the French head of state to make an appearance at the country's biggest agricultural fair. And the show began under clear skies and sunshine as France continues to suffer from a winter drought.
The nation needs to do with water what has been done with energy, a form of saving plan. That is to say that we must all pay attention to this resource which is becoming rare. This is what I said at the end of the summer. It is the end of abundance.
Well, there are hundreds of exhibitors and thousands of visitors, particularly at the cheese, ham, wine and cider tasting sections. Along with the traditional livestock, cattle, pigs, sheep and goats, there are stands showcasing the latest in agricultural technology, advances in fish farming, protection for forests and arable lands, and also the latest in machinery and equipment. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
China's manned space program is celebrating its 30th year. And to mark the milestone, a new exhibition has opened at the National Museum in Beijing. It comes just months after China completed its Tiangong space station. From Beijing, our correspondent Sun Ye reports.
The exhibition features models of China's newly completed space station, including a life-size model of its core module, China's famous Long March carrier rockets, and much historical memorabilia that tells the story of 3 decades of development.
From 1992, when the program started, we've always worked for new advances and breakthroughs in space exploration. And in recent years, we've worked to build the China space station, making our previous 3-step dreams into reality. We hope the exhibition will pass our passion for the cause to more people. And now, in a new era, Chinese people will explore even further into space and contribute to all humankind with our quest.
From Shenzhou 13's return capsule to moon soil samples.
There are items that commemorate the milestones in China's space exploration, and now unveiling for the first time China's next-generation manned spaceship and moon service lander, designed for China's next-stage missions for the moon.
And next-generation Long March carrier rockets that will make future moon probe possible.
This is the rocket we're developing for the manned moon probe. It will be around 3 times more capable than the Long March 5B carrier rocket, with a thrust of over 2,600 tons. And this means major progress, as the carrier rocket's capability often translates to the scope of overall space exploration. This means our field of exploration extends from the Earth to the Earth-Moon space. We're also developing new rockets for the China space station, rockets that will be reusable.
The exhibition will run for 3 months. CGTN, Beijing.
Our headlines again. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky calls for a meeting with China's President Xi Jinping to discuss Beijing's proposal on ending the conflict in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Russia welcomes China's 12-point plan and says it is open to talks. And millions of people cast their vote in Nigeria as long queues form outside polling stations for the tightly contested presidential election. And that is The World Today. Thank you for watching. There's more news at the top of the hour. Coming up next, it's The Agenda with Juliet Mann. For now, from all of the team here in London, goodbye.